Okay, good morning, welcome, or I guess technically it's afternoon. I'm Allie Lewis, coordinator for the Vermont Ag Water Quality Partnership. Thank you all so much for joining us today for this webinar focused on the soil health of grazing. We're very excited to welcome Maggie Donin of the Vermont Land Trust, Cheryl Cesario and Juan Alvez of UVM Extension to share about their work, share about practices and information that you should know of. And as a quick reminder, I just wanted to give an overview about the partnership. You know, our purpose is to improve ag water quality in Vermont by coordinating all the partner efforts that are going on, you know, providing the best education, technical, and financial assistance to the farming community in a way that's efficient, you know, targeted for our water quality goals, and is providing the best service experience possible for the landowner. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen and ask our presenters to introduce themselves. So Maggie, do you want to go first?
Sure, sure. Yeah, I'm Maggie. I'm the Farmland Access Program Director at the Vermont Land Trust. I've been in this position since like December of 2019. So much of it has been during COVID, which has been strange, but luckily I was working in Vermont prior to this position, so have a lot of relationships with folks. And I'm excited to share about our conservation innovation grant that we received with some partners. Thanks for having me. I haven't been to one of these before, so.
Oh, well, welcome. Thank you. Juan, do you want to go next?
Sure. Juan Alvez here. I'm a research associate at the UVM Extension Center for Sustainable Agriculture. I am the pasture technical coordinator, and I do research on anywhere from soil health to pasture management. I'm interested in precision agriculture, in compost, in agroforestry, in sustainable agriculture in general. I'm a generalist, and I joined the center in 2012 after finishing my PhD in environment and natural resources at UVM.
Thank you. And Cheryl.
Yep, Cheryl Cesario, grazing outreach with UVM Extension, and I'm based out of Middlebury. And I work with farmers primarily in the Champlain Valley and mostly on just technical assistance with grazing management. And I've been with Extension for about 9 years now.
Thank you. So how this is going to go today is some of our presenters have limited time. So Maggie and Juan are going to go first with about 10 minutes each and the opportunity for questions. And Cheryl's going to go at around 12:30, and then we'll have the opportunity for more questions and group dialogue. Presenters, please feel free to let this group know if pop-up questions are okay. I will also be managing the chat and keeping an eye out as questions come up there. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Maggie.
Cool, and I'm going to share my screen. Can you all see this?
Yes.
Yes.
Perfect. Cool. And yeah, Cheryl and Juan are also involved in this project, so it's great because there may be some questions that I can't answer, and Juan especially was involved in the development of this and some of the background work leading up to this. So so we received it's an NRCS Conservation Innovation Grant under their soil health demonstration sort of category in the on-farm trials part of their grant. It's called Managing Pasture for Healthy Farms and Soils in Vermont, and it's started, we thought it would start in January of 2021. We're still kind of waiting on our grant agreement with NRCS, but it should officially begin kind of any day now. And it's a 5-year project. And so the partners, although the Vermont Land Trust is the sort of main recipient of the funding, it's heavily focused on partnerships with Biological Capital and University of Vermont and UVM Extension. So you can see here, we all have different roles to play. VLT's role is really around connecting with our network of producers. Farms can participate in this project who have conserved land, and also folks who don't own or manage conserved land. So, but we do have relationships with lots of landowners and farmers across the state. We also have experience, disseminating payments. So we're sort of playing that hub role. And then biological capital and UVM are focused on the research and data collection component, the sort of study design, and then UVM extension focused on the technical assistance for the producers. So we're working with farmers to implement a 4-part soil health management system. So the 4 practices that we're hoping that producers will either continue to do or start to do are no-till seeding of forage and cover crops, some kind of nutrient management application. So that could be compost amendment or other nutrient amendments, management intensive rotational grazing, and then keyline plowing or subsoiling. So I think when we originally put in this proposal, our idea is that we would engage 16 to 20 producers who would all be implementing these practices, all 4 practices for the first time, or on a new parcel, so that we could see what the outcomes of these practices, what happens on the landscape. I think we've realized that, that's a tall order. And so our design has changed a little bit in that management intensive grazing is the one practice that we are requiring all farmers to either be currently doing or transition into doing. And then the other 3 practices are really based upon the recommendations of technical service providers as to whether or not they make sense, whether or not they're beneficial. The goals of the project are to, measure the impact of those practices on soil and ecosystem health, do some financial analysis on those stacked practices, understand the social outcomes, and then also use the data that we gather to make develop a predictive model of what the impacts of implementing these practices across a larger landscape would look like, and what both the ecological, economic, and social outcomes potentially could be. We're looking to engage 16 to 20 farmers in this. We are sort of in the application review stage now, talking with interested farmers, trying to find kind of the right set of producers to work with. And so we're looking really for farms that are across the Vermont landscape. They don't have to be conserved. And the research team is really trying to find, how do we get the right spread of location, soil type, set of practices, scale of farm, and, so that we can have relevant information that we gather. So these are our research objectives and sort of data collection information. This is generally what we're going to be collecting. The first year, this year is really going to be about baseline, kind of understanding what's currently going on. And then as practices are implemented, taking, annual soil tests and gathering some additional management information on costs, information on sort of the social impacts of these practices for producers. And so a big part of this program is not only are we, asking producers to potentially implement new practices or do these practices on an expanded land base, but we also have, there's a payment component for it. So the idea is that producers get paid to implement these practices. So there's over $1 million of the money that we received is meant to, will go out and pay farmers for adoption. And so we have a set of, we have sort of a breakdown of practices, and I can share in the chat when I'm done the link to our FAQ to where people can find out, can kind of see our payment model. But each practice has a specific payment associated with it. And again, I think our hope initially was that it would be, all folks going from sort of doing none of these practices to doing all. And I think we've realized that's unlikely. And so the payments are really we have a set of money that we can distribute across the farms. And so once we have our set of farmers, we'll be basically making kind of a payment proposal to each producer saying, these are the practices you're agreeing to do. This is what you're going to get paid to do them. Do you want to participate in this project? We're working to try to share the data as openly as possible. You know, we know we'll have sort of a span of experience in the group in terms of, you know, early adopters who've been doing these practices for a long time to people who are newer. And we do imagine there'll be an element of mentorship. We're hoping it will be somewhat of a cohort since it is a relatively small number of producers. We, you know, obviously want people who want to participate over the course of 5 years, and folks who are excited and passionate and kind of understand the bigger picture of why we want to study this. And so we have a web page up, vlt.org/healthy soil. Again, I can put that in the chat. And on there you can find our sort of a informational one pager, as well as a frequently asked questions document that lays out the sort of annual process, as well as the more specific information about the payment structure. And it also has another version of this presentation that a different staff member did that's recorded if you want to, you know, share that or watch it again. Not that you want to hear all this again, but it's up there. And I'm happy to take questions now, and if, you know, questions come up later and I'm not here again, and Juan is here, he may be able to answer some of those, but happy to do that for a couple minutes. And I'll put the website and I'll also put my email address in the chat if people have individual questions and they want to just email me directly, or they have, you know, you're a producer and you're interested in potentially participating, or you know a producer who might be a good fit, or whatever questions you might have. We are still accepting applications. The application is still live on our website. So if you want to apply, I'll put the link to the application in the chat. We've had about 45 to 50 producers apply so far, which is pretty exciting, like a good array from across the state, different, you know, like folks who I consider to be real experts in these areas. We have a lot to learn from, you know, more kind of beginning farmers who are, you know, slightly newer to these practices. So I feel good about the cohort that we have sort of coming together.
Well, thanks for that overview, Maggie. It was really nice to get a debrief on this new opportunity. And folks, please do type your questions into the chat. We're going to move along to Juan's presentation. And Maggie's put some information in the chat. So with that, I'll hand it over.
Okay, thank you so much. Bear with me. I'm gonna go a little fast because I have some stuff. I'm going to present my research, current and future research. So this is me. I come from the University of Santa Catarina in Brazil, and then I did my master's and PhD at UVM. I'm going to talk about, you know, a little background about soils and grazing management, and then the research projects that I have. So why soil health? Because we are losing soils at a rate of, you know, 50,000 square kilometers a year. That's about a country of Costa Rica that we lose every year because of mismanagement of soil. And we know that soils should hold many functions for society, many ecosystem services for society. So they are really, really important. And my approach to these is to count on cows, high stock density, moved frequently, and allowing enough rest so that they can generate perfect soil, collecting huge amounts of organic matter, inoculating it with beneficial bacteria who digest that organic matter, and then manuring, manuring and urinating all these pastures that will receive their fertility. Most cows, livestock, most ruminant livestock return about 90% of their nutrients to the land, and they use very little water, because the water they use is, when we talk about water footprint, oftentimes it's said that cows use 93% of the water to produce very little protein, but most of this 93% of water is green water. So it's rainwater that will fall anyways, and cow will return that water to the soil by urinating. So cows are able to return about 100 pounds of calcium, potassium, and phosphorus to the soil, and over 200 pounds of nitrogen per year. This is one animal unit. And why pasture? Because it's the least expensive and is comparable in quality to every other feed. Here's another chart that shows that pasture, are the least expensive feeds. So you should treat your pastures like a crop. The older the pasture, the more pores, more microbes, more function, more processes, and better soils. Least money for the farmer to spend. And the longer the rest, the stronger the roots. You can tell, the root mass here of an older pasture that is resting the most, makes more mass of roots over time. So I also rely on many grazing and soil health principles. So minimizing soil disturbance as much as possible, keeping soils covered with diverse plants and roots, move cows daily, long rests, diverse pastures for a full recovery before grazing, and then integrate livestock animals. I also rely on the theory of different ecosystem processes that tell me that using ruminants as a tool to modify or to improve landscapes is the right way to go. So I have a grazing lab at UVM, which resides in my mind. So this is my principles, my guiding principles in my research. I don't research pasture. I research in a holistic way. I like to see soil, pastures, and animals because we're dealing with grazing. But I'm also interested in agroforestry and other sustainable agriculture techniques and practices. Some of the boxes you see, the hard boxes you see, are projects I was or I will be engaged in the near future, or I was engaged and I ended that project. For about 5 years, I researched at Philo Ridge Farm. That was a long-term research and education to benefit farmers. I did research on soil health, pasture management, cover crops, and high quality beef. At Philo Ridge is 100% pasture-based, multi-species. They rely on fresh grass from May through November, and then on hay for the rest of the year. And this is the first harvest of beef they got, as really good quality beef. So I did long-term soil research at Philo Ridge for 5 years. And in the first, I measured 2015, 2017, and 2019. I measured soils across the farm. And in the first 2 measurements between 15 and 17, I found that soils increased in organic matter about 1.7%, so a little less than 2%. And I started, poking around and transforming that less than 2% in terms of functionality for the farm and for the landscape. And over 188 acres, that means that cow can, not cow, but the farm can infiltrate now almost 7 million gallons of water per year. It's the same as it can absorb a rain of 1.36 inches between 1 and 6 inches of rain between 1 and 6 inches of the soil. So it can withstand that increase in 2 years can withstand a heavy rain of about 34 or 35 millimeters of rain at once, and the water will infiltrate. So meaning that the soil is starting to function. The soils were depleted, were degraded when we started experimenting with them. What else? In terms of productivity, this 1.7 increase in soil organic matter meant also that we produced about almost 56,000 pounds of forage, or around 69 round bales, give or take, depending on the size of the round bale. But it meant about 28 additional animal units and savings of $4,000 in terms of bale. In terms of carbon sequestration, I'm still running the numbers. This is preliminary, but I got about 4.5 tons per acre per year of carbon equivalents. In a potential market for ecosystem services, assuming that the metric ton of carbon CO2 equivalents is around 750 a ton, this is above $200 an acre for the whole farm over 2 years. So conclusions: well-managed grazing plus soil conservation practice means healthy soils, better rainfall and infiltration and retention of this water, more carbon sequestration and higher production. So I did a little modeling here where I calculated the emissions of a cow per year and the offsets of the system per year, and the offsets outweigh the production of CO2 equivalents. I still have to review these numbers, and I'm working on a publication of these numbers, but this is not ready yet. I also compare multi-cover crop mixes because I wanted to extend the grazing season and cover the summer slump. And so I worked with about 36 different forages where I wanted to, as I said, increase the amount of forage, in the summer slump, extend the grazing season way over October. We know that we can have the first frost around September. So, anyways, these are some of the mixes. These are the experimental area. These are some of the numbers. Mix C, which I'm not going to go through this now, was the cheapest one and the one that yielded the most. I also compared with Joshua Faulkner, my colleague at Extension, biological and mechanical methods of decompaction. And so we run penetrometers, and we know that plants can penetrate the soil above 300 PSI. So some of the fields, I'm showing different fields here and different compactions. This is Island Field, then Middle Field, and then Island Field West, was the least compacted one. These were the treatments, 3 biological treatments and 1 mechanical treatment, AKA subsoiling. And we found, we're still working on that. Another experiment I did is comparing, different forage trials with shade tolerance. And I try to find out, which forage or forage mixes yielded more and had more quality. Going through these. I also compare the study comparing 8 different compost sources compared to Johnson-Su bioreactor. We found out that residential compost and Johnson-Su were the ones that had more life in it. More life meaning more active bacteria, more fungi compared to commercial. And you can see commercial here, and compared to sheep compost or beef. There are 2 beef farms here. So I compare 8 sources of compost across the board. In terms of fungi and bacteria, active fungus and bacteria, residential compost was the most living compost. I'm also interested in poking around with precision agriculture because, you know, now everything is like going into clouds, and so I'm poking around with, I ordered this box from an electrical engineer. This box has 5 different sensors that sniff CO2, methane, hydrogen sulfide, ammonia, temperature, and humidity. And we put in 2 bedded pack barns, one a dairy farm and the other one's a beef farm, to determine the amount of gases that emanate from that. And an anecdote I have for that is that in the first farm, there were some calves, you know, at the end of the winter time, you know, there were cows were having babies, and at some point we saw a spike in ammonia because, you know, this connects wirelessly, and I can check, you know, frequently what the gases are doing in the barn because it wasn't well ventilated. There was a spike in ammonia, which produced pneumonia, and then it killed 1 calf and, you know, injured many others. And a practical recommendation for that would be to, you know, wait a little longer, you know, in the or have, you know, cows, you know, give birth outside instead of giving birth in the barn. So this box, I also work with other microsensors and respirometers and infiltrometers, you know, measuring, you know, soil infiltration, etc. And I don't want to explode my time, so I'll take questions.
I'll put a question in. What do you think are the, you know, top 2 or 3 areas where, you know, Vermont farmers could make improvements for their grazing?
Top 2 areas. I think Vermont farmers need to understand the principles of grazing. There are 4 principles of grazing, and they can improve dramatically. Also, bringing water to the animals is a concept that no matter how expensive might be, the productivity you gain from bringing water to the animals outweighs any costs of not bringing water to, or making animals walk, you know, long distances to get water, basically. I got a little confused with the question, so I had something else to say, but I blanked. So may come back later.
Thank you. Any other questions? Okay, well, thank you so much. And if you don't mind just putting your email in the chat, if folks do have questions, please type them into the chat and I can send them your way.
I will, and I'm sorry. Thank you for the opportunity to present about my research. I will have to hop off this meeting because I have another meeting I had to present, so I have to go now. I'll leave my email here, and please contact me with any questions.
Thank you so much. Okay, Cheryl.
Sorry, Cheryl.
Oh, no problem. Let's see here. And, oh, are we good? Okay.
Yeah. can see that.
So I'm excited to talk to you about this really fun project. This is a 2-year project I'm working on, and we're 1 year in, and I'm just really enjoying this group of people so much. So this is a grant I got through the Northeast Dairy Business Innovation Center, and it is a grazing cohort. It's a pilot project. And so a lot of you are already familiar, just this overview of like, what is this Dairy Business Innovation Center? It's through Agency of Agriculture. Vermont is one of the regional hubs. I think there's others in the country. The state basically got like $6.5 million, and it is to provide support through various channels for the dairy industry. And grazing support's just like one small element of that. So in March 2020, I applied. It was a 2-year project. Like I said, it's a pilot. And the idea is to really focus on some targeted grazing support with a very small group of producers. And you see at the bottom there, it says plus producer grant. So for me, this was really like the big selling point. When I read the RFP, it was, I think the group could have up to 6. Our group has 5. And each of those producers, if they participated in the program, they were eligible for a $10,000 grant. I was like, well, I can't pass that up. I think that would be a great opportunity for people. So, just to kind of back up a little bit before we get into like the nuts and bolts of our group, which I really want to talk to you about the people in the group. But one of the big focuses of this is a focus on a paradigm shift, which is that pasture is a crop. I think Juan just mentioned that as well. And it's not a place that we park the animals. It's a crop that we manage, just like we would manage our hay crops or other cropping systems, to try to get the most yield and efficiency out of it. And if you can kind of see on the side there, there's always a lot of discussion about all the benefits of pasture environmentally. There's obviously animal benefits, and there's also human nutritional benefits. But I think the biggest takeaway for me is when I'm talking to farmers, the biggest motivator, right, is cost savings. Of course, right? If we're not making a profit, we can't do any of these other good things. We have to be making money to do all these other wonderful things on our farms. And just to be clear here, on the left, like, we're not going to get away from this. We're not going to move fully into pasture in our climate. So we will still be harvesting feed. But the point being that photo on the left, that's really expensive. And so can we take a portion of that and have the animals working for us and do some of that harvesting so that we have less of the picture on the left, because that right there is about $1,000 an hour. Also on the back end, right? We're not going to get away from, there's nothing wrong with the left-hand picture, and we're not going to get away from that. But can we have the animals do some of that spreading and some of that work through good grazing management? So the premise of the cohort model, the power lies in the group. Like I said, this group is amazing. So I'm just gonna, I know it's hard to see their faces, but I'm gonna kind of introduce them here. On the left, we have Dave Seward, who farms with his brother Art in East Wallingford. The next is Scott Cleveland, who is in Paulet. This is actually photo taken on his farm last August. In the red there is Caleb Smith, who's in Danby, and then Cindy Cahart from New Haven, and then Brad Thomas from Orwell. And I think what's really important to point out, when you're putting together a group like this, is that these folks are all close enough to each other that they can get to each other's farms. So that's part of our program, but they're not close enough that they're neighbors. And, sometimes that's a turn off for people. They don't want, people don't always want their neighbors knowing their business. So this works out really well. We have 2 producers in Addison County, 3 in Rutland County. Some of them kind of knew each other, but not really. And so it's been really interesting as they've kind of gotten to know each other, and they're all sort of in a similar stage. So, and similar in scale. So everybody here is milking between 70 and 140 cows. They're in some stage of transition to grazing, and that's anything from considering it as an option on the table, moving their operation forward, or in some stage of implementation, which here is an example on Scott's farm. Last year was his first year implementing his new grazing system. So what do we do? It's funny, last year was a really weird year to build an entire program based on human interactions, since we weren't really able to do that. But, the summer things kind of leveled out. And so, one element of this is meeting with the producers one-on-one. And so I was able to do that and meet with each of these folks, several times over the grazing season. And that varies again, because they're all kind of in different places. So some of it's planning work, some of it's monitoring, hooking them up with other resources, whether they're thinking about like additional NRCS contracts or state money through the pasture and surface water program or farm viability or what have you. And then the other piece of the program is that we meet as a group several times. And so we were able to miraculously pull that off last year. We met on Scott's farm there in August. And that I'm going to talk more about him towards the end. Like I said, this was his first full season grazing. He did a miraculous job. And then we also, in October, we met at Caleb Smith's farm. Sarah Flack actually joined us for that. And Caleb's in a position where he has signed an NRCS contract. He hasn't implemented it yet. And there's, this stuff's challenging, right? Like, I mean, I know there's a lot of NRCS folks on here today, and, this is, it's a big shift for people. And so at Caleb's, there's a lot of logistical figuring on that implementation and just making sure it goes in right the first time. And so just the ability, like I said, the power is in the group. I mean, to put 7 heads together that day and really kind of discuss different options was pretty cool. The other piece of it too is we have invited guests. So like I mentioned, Sarah Flack has come down to meet with the group. I've got a couple of Vermont farmers from other parts of the state that are going to come meet with them this summer. And kind of important to note, those sort of mentor type guests are people who have been through this, right? I think that's really important. People who have transitioned in some form or another, and they understand what the challenges are and what the potential road bumps are. And we're also going to have, I wasn't able to do this last year because we couldn't have any out of state guests, but I think now we might be in the clear, is to have some of the folks from the ranch management consulting group, which is basically like livestock business management. It's based out of Wyoming. Those guys are really high level. Anyway, I'm really excited for those folks to come and meet with these producers, especially as such a small group. So, some additional resources and things that they have been provided as part of this project is everyone has gotten Sarah Flack's book, The Art and Science of Grazing, which is a really good, user-friendly, great photos, just a really good resource to kind of keep. Everyone's gotten a subscription to Graze Magazine, and that's a monthly publication, and that will get renewed. So they're going to get that for 2 years. And then if they want to continue it after that, they can. I think this publication is really great because it's applicable to our climate. It's based out of Wisconsin. It's not trying to sell you a lot of stuff. There's pretty good, just really tangible, useful information in there. They have a farmer panel they ask questions to every month, and I would say it's real. It's not pie in the sky. And then everyone has gotten Dave Pratt's book, and Dave Pratt was the CEO of Ranch Management Consulting, and he's recently retired, but he still does consulting for them. And, one of the first things we kind of read together as a group was a chapter from Dave's book. And this is just like one small excerpt. It said, the hardest part of change is changing. You'll achieve more success faster by determining the right strategy, committing to it, and making the transition to it as short as possible. And I think just to clarify there, it's not to say that someone would just jump lightly into this and just switch right over. That's not how it goes. But this idea that once you commit, right, like you do the plan, you do a solid plan, you have confidence in the plan, and then you can commit and know, like, I can move forward. I have a really good plan. Versus, right, and again, like, I know there's a lot of NRCS people, and we've all seen this, is just because you get the infrastructure in place doesn't mean the system automatically just takes off, right? And what we see is when someone has the infrastructure and they kind of, wade halfway in, well, you're not really getting the full efficiency and yields off the pasture, but you're no longer getting those full yields and efficiency off the hay fields, right? If you're converting land. So it's like, you don't get the benefits of either, right? You have the cost of the old way and no benefits of the new way. And then you're kind of in this middle ground. And like they say, if you're in the middle of the road, you're, the only things in the middle of the road are yellow stripes and dead armadillos. So you don't want to be there. You got to like take the plunge and with confidence. So I'm going to give you an example here. So this is Brian and Cindy Cahart. They're in New Haven. And so these folks, they in 2018 is when they first kind of started putting in some infrastructure. And, it's a big learning curve and it's a big challenge. And I think the first year was really, really difficult. And that's where it's like, we want to make sure we're capturing that full value out of the pasture. So in 2018, we did some work together to come up with what's the dry matter intake from grazing. And how you do that, I think a lot of you know this, but how you do that is you look at the winter ration and compare it with what you're feeding during the grazing season and do some figuring, and then you get a percentage. And they were at 28%. And you could pose that question of, it's a lot of work. Is that worth it for 28% dry matter? And so they've really worked hard to kind of just intensify their system and really just do a lot of learning. And it's, you can see on the right here, Cindy and I are doing a project through Ben and Jerry's. They're a caring dairy. So they're doing the Prove It project, it's called. And the project that we're working on is measuring dry matter on pasture. And you can see on the right, like, it looks pretty good. It's pretty impressive. So things have really come a long way. And at the end of 2020, we did their calculations again. So that's the middle picture. That's what she sent me. And we came up with 38% dry matter from pasture. So that's 10% increase. That's significant. And so what we're working on this year is we're going to kind of be tracking month by month what that looks like. So at the end of the year, we can really start putting dollar values on that savings. And even just what's that savings just to go up 10%? And then what happens if you went up to like 45%? What does that look like? And, those are the real motivators for people when they start to look at like the dollars, right? Because it starts to become real money. And so here's just another example. You may have seen this because this is now making the rounds out there in the world. So Scott and Tracy Cleveland. So Scott, he, first of all, is on like the best soil in the whole state, pretty much, in Pollitt. And I never really worked with him. I mean, he's a crop guy. This is like a serious crop guy. And so I got a call at one point in 2018, like, hey, Scott Cleveland just signed a grazing contract. Do you want to go meet with him? I was like, wow, Scott Cleveland signed a grazing contract. So I went down to meet with him, and, the plan was he was going to seed down all the land around his barn, which was like basically the best soil on his whole entire farm. And I was like, wow, this is really interesting. And you always know when a project, I think I can start to tell when is it going to go really well, is when you ask the producer, like, wow, why are you doing that? And he's like, well, if this grows my best corn, it'll grow great pasture, that's for sure. And it's funny because Brian Cahart had said the same thing when I first met with him. And so Scott seeded down all that land, and all his neighbors were talking about him, of course. And then in 2019, he started putting in all the infrastructure, like the fence and the water and the tubs and the lanes, you name it. And then in September 2019, I went out to meet with him and we kind of looked at everything and he was like, all right, so, now what do I do? And so, I think it's like that idea of like, you just start doing it and you might do it wrong. Right. But it's this, learning curve. But I was really impressed. He got 6 weeks of grazing that year and it went pretty well. And in the winter we talked and he's like, I'm really excited to go into this coming year. And I was like, wow, you don't usually hear that from a lot of people. Like, I'm excited for the future. So anyway, 2020 was a really good success. We met several times over the season last year just to kind of monitor how things were going. And then we were able to sit down at the end and kind of look at stored feeds, what he was feeding, how that compared to his winter ration. And I mean, this is like so impressive. I mean, you can see right there, I mean, the cows were like up to their knees in grass. He averaged 64% dry matter from pasture. I mean, that's a lot, and if you think like, so he's not an organic producer, organic regulations is you have to be 30% or more. So, I mean, he's like doubling that and then some. But last year was really dry, right? So one thing he did that was so smart, a lot of times people get really hung up and like they kind of keep going around and around and around. And it's like circling the drain. Like there's less and less grass every time you go around because it's not raining, it's not growing. So he took all the animals, he put them in a sacrifice lot on the top of a hill, fed them, and they grazed a little at night and some other places. So he dropped his dry matter intake way back down to like 20% in the month of July. And that just was huge because it gave everything else a chance to grow back. And that picture I showed you in the beginning, where he's like, they're all standing in that field, that was at the end of August. He wouldn't have had that if he didn't do what he did in July. And so when we did the numbers, something like around 1,500 a week in saving between grain, he feeds corn silage, haylage, baleage, his grain, and it was like 1,500 a week in savings. During July, I think it dropped down to like $600 and something a week, still really significant. And when we added it up for like a 25-week period, it was around $34,000. And I mean, that's what we're talking about. Like that's real money. Like that makes a big difference in your bottom line for the year. So they're super psyched. They're looking at where else can they fence on their farm, because he's like, the more I have fenced, the more options I have. And that's so true. I think one of the nice things with this money through the center is it's there's not a lot of strings attached. So I think it's going to foster a lot of creativity. He's thinking about fencing some fields that he grows corn on so that when he plants cover crop, he can graze it too. Obviously, like, in federal programs, we don't have that much wiggle room. So, we don't typically see the ability to put fence around annual cropland. But with this money, he could potentially do that. And so he's pretty excited to think about, if I grow cover crops, if I can graze my cover crops, I might get like 2 weeks on this end. And, that starts to make a really big difference when you look at like week by week savings. So that is the project kind of in a nutshell. And my hope is by the time this is done next May, we'll have a little bit more, but we'll have more on some of the other producers and sharing on like, what maybe they've been able to do with some of this grant money. But ultimately, I think this will still live on for me beyond the grant period, because I could see doing something similar when Caleb Smith gets his system implemented, but we won't know the outcomes of that until like fall 2022. But I still think there's opportunities with the other producers in the program to really capture, what they've been able to do through this program. So that's all I have.
Thank you. That was excellent. Do you folks have any questions for Cheryl? And I have to comment, you have beautiful photos in your presentation. We're always looking for photos in the partnership. So I hope I hope to be able to take pictures as beautiful as the ones you have.
sharing. Stop sharing. There we go. Sorry about that.
So feel free to chime in or to just put your question in the chat.
Oh, I think you're muted, Allie.
I've just been chatting away. Thank you for telling me. Okay, what I was saying was thank you all for joining us, and a huge thank you to the presenters. I put a link in the chat for an evaluation of the webinar today. We'd greatly appreciate it if you could take a moment to fill that out. Give us some feedback so we can make sure that the next iteration of the webinar series is what you're looking for. And also, if you do have questions for the presenters, please feel free to put them into the chat for when a note with who they're for, and I will.
Thank you.